My name is Michael Benner. I am a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And so today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about PowerShell in the cloud. Welcome to Azure Cloud Shell. How many people are using Azure Cloud Shell? Okay, cool. When I was sitting in the back of the room yesterday, it looked like about 20 people. But Azure Cloud Shell is a browser accessible way for you to engage with your resources that you have up in Azure. And as Joey was saying, I've never done it, but Joey was saying yesterday that there's a way that you can go through Cloud Shell and maybe take things like Ansible or Terraform and be able to do things on-prem. That might be a little bit above my pay grade, but we're going to do some cool things today. So it gives you authenticated access into your subscription and access to your resources. The beautiful thing about Cloud Shell is we love Bash and we love PowerShell. Probably love PowerShell a little bit more. So that's what we're going to be covering today. But you can use either one of those flavors depending on where you come from. So if you come from a Linux background and you're more familiar with Bash and Azure CLI, that's a good way to go. If you're more a PowerShell person, you can use PowerShell, the Azure PowerShell modules that are built in, and all of the other tools as well. It's a private and secure environment for you to be able to access your things up in Azure. And we also have multiple points of entry for you to get into Cloud Shell. So up here I have, so that's up in the app. So if you have the Azure app on iOS or Android, you can go right in. Once you have it set up and securely authenticated into your tenant and subscriptions, you can simply click on Cloud Shell and it brings up a browser on your phone. So say you're out and about, say you're on the weekend, you get an emergency call, you need to do something, you pull out your handy phone and maybe I'll just stand over here. Pull out your handy phone and you can be able to access your resource. We can also do it through the Azure Portal as well. So when you're logged into the Azure Portal, you go click up on the Cloud Shell icon, gives you access to that. You can also get access to it through shell.azure.com. So like we mentioned, a couple different places, the Azure Portal, shell.azure.com. We're going to talk about the account extension in Visual Studio Code and how you can use that to get access into Cloud Shell from Visual Studio Code. So you don't even have to go up into a browser. You can do it straight from code. Also, there's a lot of integration that we've built into the Docs platform. So in docs.microsoft.com, we've got a nice try it button that'll allow you to be able to take the code that's in our documentation, try that in your subscription to see how the commands work. So it's a great way for you to be able to learn how to use the things in Cloud Shell. We talked about the Azure mobile app. One thing I'll mention here with the try it is we'll also show you today how to use Microsoft Learn as well to be able to use Azure Cloud Shell, because we built Azure Cloud Shell into the Learn platform. So it gives you a sandbox to be able to run through all of the activities to help you learn things about Azure and other tools that we have. So that's it for the slides. So the rest of this is going to be all demo. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of exploring a shell. We're going to start from the beginning, basically the initial configuration of when you go into Cloud Shell. So in the Azure Portal, I'm going to simply click on Azure Cloud Shell, and it's going to give me the option of choosing Bash or PowerShell at this time, which one I want to have loaded for me. I'm going to choose PowerShell because that's the one we're going to be working with throughout the demo. There we go. And then at this point, we see that no storage is mounted. I need to mount storage in order for Azure Cloud Shell to work. So I get a 5 gig file share inside of a storage account that gets created in Azure. So there is a small cost to that. I think I figured out the last time it was like 45 cents, I think, for my subscription that I ran through it. So minimal cost on this file storage. When you think about it compared to everything that you're doing, it's really a rounding error. So I'm going to choose my subscription, and then I'm going to go into the advanced settings, because the advanced settings allows me to choose my apologies. So we'll go into the advanced settings. Notice here, I got the option of doing a create new or create an existing resource group, because I have to create my resource group that my storage account is going to be in, that the file share is going to be created in. So I'm going to be using existing ones because I have some existing resources. So we'll go ahead and get that kicked off. Go ahead and create the storage. And then we see that our cloud drive has been created. And now it's initializing our cloud account in Cloud Shell. It's going to go through the authentication process. And at this point, it's going to be requesting a Cloud Shell for us to use. And so that's basically, the Cloud Shell is basically running on a container up in Azure. So it's a Linux container running PowerShell core that allows us to be able to run all of the commands that are built into that, along with a number of the other things that we have. So once we're up here, let's take a look at a couple of things in the interface before we actually jump into the CLI. So notice from the drop-down, I have two choices. So I can choose, I'm in PowerShell, but if I want to go into Bash, I can choose Bash. And what that's going to do is going to reconnect to my container that's running up there and simply relaunch the session running in Bash. What I can also do is, while I'm going through, if I want to, for some reason, restart my session, I can choose to restart the session as well. If I have questions, I can hit the question button. If I want to change the settings, so this will allow me to change the font. I can also change the size of the text. I can also send feedback back to Microsoft if I want to. I can choose to, oh, there we go. We can choose the font. I can choose to upload and download files into my Azure Cloud Shell. So we have that storage that's available for us to put files into. We're going to show you a little bit later how this basically works. So I can upload or download. That's going to basically put that into the root of my share. I normally like to use the manage file share, because what that will do is that will launch the Azure Portal and take you right into the file share that you can access inside the Azure Portal. And then you can more easily drop your files into the location that you're looking for. We can also, if we want to create another session, so if I want to have two windows open up, I can add one of those. If I want to open up the code editor, I can do that as well. So let's go ahead and jump into the console. Okay. So what we're going to do is, right now when we're first logged in, notice that the command line is Azure : So at this point, I am in what's called Azure Drive. And it basically allows us to see what's going on. So if I want to just see what commands I have available, one of the first things we like to take a look at is the PS Cloud Shell utility. So this module has a number of commands that we're going to be using. So we're going to show you how to use the enable and disable AZVM PS remoting that allows us to get into our virtual machines. And then we have a bunch of other commands that are available for us to work with within Cloud Shell. Then we can take a look at other commands that we have available. So if I want to take a look at the modules, And in this case, I want to look for the modules that are related to Azure or AZ. So we'll retype that. One would think if a guy was using videos that he would actually get the typing right. So let's take a look. So that we did a get dash module with the dash list available that basically showed us all of the available modules. So from that, we basically see we have a ton of things that are available for us to use up in Cloud Shell. So we have a bunch of Azure modules, we have SQL modules, we now have, and I'm going to be showing, if we have time, the Exchange modules that Jeffrey and Joey talked about a little bit later. So once we've taken a look at the modules, now let's take a look at different commands that we have available. So if I do a get dash command, and in this case, hey, we're looking at the AZ module again. That shows us all of the all of the Azure commands that are available. So a ton of commands that are available. So let's take a look at get-az VM. So get-az VM is going to allow us to see all of our virtual machines up in Azure. So we see we've got about 4 virtual machines. And we can simply do all of the things that we would normally do when we're working in PowerShell. We can use help. So if I want to see the help for get-az VM, I type that in there. And notice when I type help in here, it shows it a little bit differently. Notice I have a queue down here at the bottom. Because of the way help gets rendered differently than get-help, it requires me to use that queue to get out there. First time I used that, it took me a little bit before I got around to it, because in the early days, we didn't have the nice little notification down there telling you had to put queue in. So that got added in from feedback from our customers. So now if I just want to go through and do the things that I would normally do as I'm working with new commands in PowerShell, I just start exploring the different parameters. So if I want to look at the virtual machines that I have for a specific resource group, I can put the resource group name parameter in there with the value. If I want to take a look at the virtual machine, one of the specific virtual machines, or do a query for types by name, I use a wildcard search just looking for the different Linux VMs in there. I could do a get-az VM so that I can take a look at the virtual machines. So that's a little bit about working with the different commands that we have available. So the next thing what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at Azure Drive, and I mentioned this a little bit. Basically what Azure Drive does is it uses ships and it creates a hierarchical structure for our subscriptions. So you notice here that it has a PS drive for us. So what that means is that I can browse through all of the resources in my subscription using the command line. So using it just like you would go through a file structure. So if I do a directory listing, you see there's the listing of all of the different subscriptions I have. Then I can simply do a CD into the subscription that I want to work with. In this case, I'm going to go into my demo subscription. Again, do a directory. We see we have all resources, resource groups, our storage accounts. So we can dive into each one of those and be able to access those from the command line. So just like we would use PS Drive if we were doing it on the registry or any number of the other options. So we do a directory. We see that it gives us a directory listings of our virtual machines. So this is really a quick and easy way if you just needed to quickly be able to look at things that were inside of your subscription. You can simply go into Azure Drive, dive down into the resources, and you have access to that. And I can simply do a CD to change directory and go back into the root of my Azure Drive. So at this point, we're going to take a look at our cloud drive. So part of Azure Cloud Shell is that we have that cloud drive, that's storage. So that's going to be located at our home location. So I put in cd home, I go to my directory, I see I have my listing of my cloud drive here. Your cloud drive is not going to have all of these other files. Like I said, I have a lot of things that I put into here as part of this demonstration. So if I cd into that cloud drive, you notice that I have a couple of directories that I've built out in there. Once inside here, I can then simply explore those because I'm in a file system, because I'm in that file share. And if I want to simply create a folder to put some new stuff in, I can simply do a make directory, create a directory called new scripts. We're going to simply change down to the directory, and we see that that is empty for us. So then I could create new files, put those in there. It gives me a good way to be able to go through those. So now, say I want to take some code or files from my local machine and bring those up. So I chose from the drop-down menu, I chose going up to the file manager. So if I manage the file share, notice it takes me over to, it takes me over into the Azure Portal, into my storage account, into my file share. So then from there, I can simply upload any files that I want to have in there. So I just chose a bunch of different files to put up there. Go ahead and upload those. And then when we go back to our portal, we do a quick directory listing, we see our files are up there. So an easy way for us to be able to transfer files up, we can also transfer files down if we want to, but a way for us to get our resources up into there. So let's say I want to take a file that I have inside of my cloud drive. Say I created a script up there. I was playing around, created a script, and now I want to have that script locally on my system. I can use export-file to export that file, and then I can simply save it down to a local location of my choosing, and there I have my file. So fairly easy to go through and be able to take your files and put them up there for usage and put them down there. The great thing about this is all persistent. So it's persistent storage for you to use. So these are going to be there every time you go into Azure Cloud Drive. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of it and why we're a really big fan of this and we think you should be checking this out, is it gives you a persistent environment that you can log into and always have the tools you're looking for, always have the files you need, as opposed to, oh, on this laptop I go in, I don't have the modules I need. I don't have access to the files. So Azure Cloud Shell really gives you the access to that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different Cloud Shell tools and the VS Code integration. So if I do a git dash command, outside of just code, we can use VI Nano or Emacs inside of here. So if you prefer to use one of those other editors, you can. But we're going to take a look at code. So I'm going to go into my cloud drive, and then I'm going to go into my scripts directory, after I spell it correctly. And you'll notice we have a bunch of different files here. So if I want to create a new file, I simply type in code, type in the name of the file, and now I simply put in whatever I want in here. In this case, I'm just going to create a basic script put in git-azvm. And I'm going to pause real quick there. Control S will save. Control Q is going to close down the window. Or you can use the ellipsis that'll have a drop down for you to save and to quit out of that window. So once I've created that, yes?
VS Code in the browser?
Yep.
VS Code it opens
It's code based on the Monaco editor, right?
Yeah, so essentially, the VS Code is based on Monaco, which is a browser-based editing experience. The Cloud Shell editor is also based on Monaco, so think of them as like cousins, not necessarily exactly the same, but the experience is very similar.
Yeah. So it's
Like, there's no extensions in the browser extension or in the browser editor, just because that framework is part of VS Code natively, or is part of VS Code specifically, and that's not built into the Monaco editor, which is where we pull the editing experience from.
yeah. So it's a cool way to be able to, if you had to do something on the fly, say you had, built, using Terraform and you'd created a, big configuration, and then you go to run it, and it's like error out. You could quickly go into code, open that up, make a quick edit, save it, go back and do your work. So you're still probably going to use code for day-to-day stuff, but this really gives you a quick way to use code and get access to that while you're in the shell. So now if I want to if I now want to run that script, just simply run it, verifying that we actually did create a script and it actually did run. So now if I want to work with an existing script that I have up there, simply type in code, the name of the script that I want to work with. It's going to bring it, again, up in the editor. I can make a quick edit, and then up here, that's got a drop down there that allows you to either save, quit, or if you want to do Control S, Control Q to get out there. So pretty cool stuff with the built-in code. So next, we are going to take a look at working with modules. So one of the things I mentioned that what you put in here is persistent. So if you want to see what modules are available, you can just simply dump that down. Let's say you want to find a module. In this case, I want to find what modules are available for SQL. So you just do a wildcard search, and what it's going to do, it's going to bring up all of the modules that are available, and most of them are going to be coming out from the PowerShell gallery. So if there's tools that you use on a regular basis that are in the gallery, you can import and install those and have those available. And then the next time you come into Cloud Shell, those are going to be still installed for you. So they're going to stay resident for you to be able to use. So in this case, I'm just going to do install dash module and then a import dash module of the PS teaching tools. So Jeff Hicks' suite of tools that he uses for demoing. So once that's completed, if I do a get dash command based on that module, you'll see that there we go. So now those commands are available for me to work with. So quick and easy way for you to be able to get the tools that you use on a regular basis into a persistent environment for you to work with. So the next integration we have is we have a couple of extensions, and I think Joey might have mentioned these yesterday, is we have the PowerShell extension and the Azure Account extension. So the Azure Account extension, when we add this in the VS Code, what this allows us to do is it allows us to authenticate into our subscription. So once we add this extension in, instead of having to go out to the portal or go out to shell.azure.com or go to my phone, I can actually access Azure Cloud Shell inside VS Code. So once this is installed, I simply do a Control-Shift-P, and that brings up the command palette. I think did we run by that? So you can do that for PowerShell or Bash, so I can, when I get to the command palette, or I guess we're taking a look at the PowerShell one. I did it afterwards. Sorry about that. So the PowerShell extension, the PowerShell extension is going to bring a ton of the functionality, and it keeps getting changed over, keeps getting iterated on it over and over again by the team to bring in a lot of the functionality from tools like the ISC and other things so that we have a richer experience inside of VS Code. So once you have that installed, then you get a lot of great experiences with PowerShell. But let's take a look at what happens to be able to use that Azure account. So from the drop-down, notice I have Open PowerShell and Cloud Shell. So once I choose that, it's going to open up a new terminal window that's going to authenticate up into Azure that's going to allow me to be able to work inside my subscription. So notice I have a prompt just like I did up in Cloud Shell. I'm simply going to highlight some code that I have in my editor in VS Code. I go over to Terminal, run selected text, and there we go. So ran right up in my Azure tenant. So say you're playing around with some code in VS Code, you don't even have to go out to the portal. You can just simply use the Azure account extension to connect right in and run your code through there. So if you could do the same thing with Terraform or Ansible or any of that stuff that you would have if you had it locally. You could run it straight through and have it run inside your environment. So some really cool integrations, some cool ways to work with those. Next thing we're going to take a look at is VM management and how to work with virtual machines. So the first thing we're going to just take a look at is the different commands that we need to work with when we're working with virtual machines. So we have an enable and a disable AZVM PS remoting. So what these do is they basically set up our virtual machines that are running in Azure to allow us to remote into them through Cloud Shell. Then we use enter-azvm, just like we would do enter-ps session, or we use invoke-az command, just like we would use invoke-command. The commands work very similar, and we're going to see how those work. So I'm just going to create a couple of variables here, because that's going to just make it easier for the code that I'm going to be running in. So I have some Linux workloads, and I have some Windows workloads that are running up in Azure. So I just put the names in there. My resource group, I create a variable for that, and then credentials. Put in the password.
What was that password manager you were using?
I think that was Notepad. That's the way the old school people do it. I've been around for a couple decades, so. So you notice here I do an enable-azvm-ps remoting, put in the name of the virtual machine, the resource group, notice the protocol, I'm calling HTTPS, so it's going to be using WinRM. Notice the OS type is Windows. And so this is going to take a process through the magic of Hollywood. It ended in a couple seconds. This usually takes a bit of time. The reason for that is behind the scenes a number of things are going on. So it's verifying that WinRM is set up properly for you to be able to remote in that system. It's also verifying that the ports are open in the network security group that the virtual machines are in. So if the ports aren't open, then it will set up the specific rules that need to be in place for you to be able to connect in. One of the important things that people need to know, I wrote a blog post about this last week on itopstalk.com, is that currently, in order to work with these, the virtual machines are using public IP addresses. And I realize a lot of people do not use virtual machines with public IP addresses. We know that. We are working on some things to make that experience better for you. So stay tuned on that sort of thing. But I kind of show you a poor person's way of being able to go into this. You could also use just-in-time VM access for doing similar to get into your virtual machines if you want to be a little bit more secure. So then we do the same thing for our Linux VM. We choose a protocol, SSH in this case, the OS type. So on the Linux side, what it's going to do for the Linux machine is it's going to be very similar. It needs to set up the Linux machine in order to be able to connect into it. So it's going to install PowerShell core on that Linux system if it doesn't have it. It's going to make sure that SSH is set up properly for you to connect in. It's also going to do the network security group, the rules on there to make sure that those go in. So now I just simply do an invoke-azvm command for my Windows machine, and I'm just using a script block. I'm putting my credential in there. After a couple minutes, actually it'll be a couple seconds, we see that it brings back the Windows services that are running. Doing the same thing against a Linux machine. Notice here a little bit differently here is I still have my script block. I'm using uname to just get some information about the Linux system. But I put my username in and then the key file path to my public key for SSH. Once we run that, that'll bring back that information for us as well. So it gives it that same experience that we have locally when we're using PowerShell to use things like invoke-command to do either one-to-one or one-to-many connections against multiple machines. We see we get our response back. And then the next thing what we're going to take a look at is show you how to do real-time going into those. So invoke command is often going to be used for invoke command is generally going to be used for one-to-many, oftentimes called fan out, where you're going out to multiple machines, wanting the code to run on the remote machines, and then you simply getting the output back. We're not sitting on the machine and doing real live commands. Whereas using enter-ps session, but in this case, enter-azvm, that's where we want to actually be real time on the system. So if we want to go onto that system and we want to run real time commands on it to get real feedback, then we're going to use enter-azvm to do that. And so we see that it tells us right in the command line. So just like if you've used enter-ps session locally, it tells you what system you're connected to. So we see that we're connected to a virtual machine inside of Azure. And if we just do a basic who am I, it tells me who I'm logged in as. I can do that same command get-service. Shows me the service. I do an exit. It takes me right out of that experience. So remember I told you about in order to get into these virtual machines, it will open up some ports that maybe people don't want to have open on a regular basis. So outside the scope of this, just-in-time VM access is a feature that you can use in Azure to secure down your virtual machines. But if you're doing this in a, hey, I need to get into these for about half an hour and then I'm leaving, you can simply disable everything on the way out. So you can use the disable azvm-ps remoting to remove the same settings that you put in. So just like when we went through it in the beginning, this is going to take a few minutes to go through because it's basically going to remove everything that it added previously. So it's going to go through and it's going to close down all of those ports that are open. It's going to, I'm going to ask Danny to, I'm going to pull the, it does remove PowerShell core from the Linux machines when you disable it, right?
No, it leaves them there.
Oh, it does leave it there? Okay, good to know. So it does leave that there, which is good because if you have to go in there again, that's cool. So that's a little bit of working with inside of the Azure Cloud Shell. Yes?
One comment, another alternative, if you didn't want to contact these with
Very cool. Yeah, I saw somebody mention that. I saw on Twitter somebody had mentioned that. So definitely a good way to run through that as well. It was, I think it was run command.
With that, you get it is going through run command, so it's not necessarily going to be the instantaneous aspect that you get with normal PowerShell.
Very slow.
Yeah.
2-3 minutes.
Yeah. So you don't. It's not like some instantaneous command that can run a bunch of sequence and have it spit it out right away. It's going to take a few minutes.
Very cool. So the next thing what I wanted to take a look at is take a look at how we can deploy virtual machines from a repository. So out at Azure Quick Start Templates, this basically has a bunch of different templates that are available that community members have created to use with, that are basically ARM templates that you can use for deploying code. So as we look down here, we see that there's a bunch of different quick start templates that are available. And in our case, we're going to be working with one that is a simple virtual machine. So if I go out here, actually out to the GitHub page, I find that's the easiest way to find all of the different commands is going out to the GitHub page. And then once you're at the GitHub page, you can kind of search for the different deployments that you want to do. In my case, I want to do a simple deployment of a VM just to put that VM out there. So you notice that it has a deploy to Azure button. You can also visualize it if you want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the raw JSON file that has all of the ARM configuration in it. So then that'll allow me to be able to take that and be able to run that inside of Azure Cloud Shell to deploy those resources. So we're going to go up. We're going to go take a look at the resources we have. Sorry to keep you up. No worries. No worries. Lunch, definitely hear it. So notice I went out and I went to the JSON file, and then when you click raw, that will take you to the raw file. So the raw file will have that's the URL that you want to use when you go into Cloud Shell. So then from Cloud Shell here, I'm just going to simply create a new AZ resource group. New AZ resource group. That's what happens when you don't clean up your demo environments. Then we're just going to do a get-az resource. We see our resources. They look like it deployed that already. Must have had those deployed already, but we could run this again. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a new -az resource group deployment. So it's doing a group deployment. So I give that deployment a name. I call out the resource group that I want the deployment to be built in. And then I use the template URI parameter to specify that URI from GitHub of the resources that I want to deploy. Once I have that, then it's going to go through the process of simply using all of that code to deploy that code. And because it's a Windows virtual machine we're deploying, it's going to ask me to put in the admin username and the admin password to go with that. And now it's simply going to go through the process for deploying this. So we are going to skip ahead a little bit because nobody wants to sit here and watch ARM templates deploy, but that can take a bit of time. This virtual machine, I think, takes 5 to 6 minutes. There's other templates out there that it takes a bit of time for all of those to be rolled out. And as you can see, it's going through and deploying the different resources that we have there. And then we see at the end, once it gets completed, if we do a git-az resource, put that into a table format, shows us all of the resources. So shows us how we can quickly take things that we have in, say, an ARM template that are deployed out in another location and deploy those in. So let's take a look at deploying infrastructure as code using Terraform. So Terraform is one of these tools that allows you to be able to, across a number of different platforms, be able to build out infrastructure. So there's a really great article that's out here by Neil Peterson where he does create a Terraform configuration. And that's basically what I'm using as the basis for the demo that I'm going to go through. So we'll jump over here, and I'm simply going to go into Cloud Shell. I'm going to go to my home directory where I have my main.tf, which is my Terraform basically configuration of what I'm going to use to declare what I want to deploy there. And I could go in here, I could make modifications to this. I'm going to simply close this, and then at this point, I'm going to initialize the Terraform to make sure the Terraform is ready to roll. So I'll run the initialization for Terraform. It'll verify that it's successful. Once it's successful, I can do a Terraform plan. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through my plan and verify that my plan is good to go. Once that's completed, I can now go and apply this configuration. So this is the one that takes a little bit of time. This demo, after I cut everything out, front to back is a 30-minute demo to go through the applying, doing a reapply, and then doing the destroy of your infrastructure after it's done. But it really shows you the power of how you can take code and take that code and easily build out your infrastructure inside of that. So we'll speed up here. And we notice that as soon as that's done, what this has done, this is basically to deploy to Cosmos DB database. It's deployed a web application, and it's basically a voting application. So it's just simply something easy, but it's showing you all of these different pieces that are being set up, and simply by declaring that code and running it, deploying it out into our infrastructure. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump back to the slides because I want to go over a couple things before we leave. So we talked about a lot of stuff today. Talked about Azure Cloud Shell, showed you how to get it set up in your environment, showed you the different tools, VS Code, how to work with and manage your deployments, and really show you some different ways to access this. Really what I wanted to do today, as most of you have probably figured out, this is nowhere near a 300 to 400 level topic because it wasn't designed to be that way. It was designed for you to see what's in Azure Cloud Shell, see the things that you can do, and it's simply another tool in your toolkit along with the other things that we use to manage our environment. And hopefully I think it's one of those that you can use on a regular basis for those of you that are currently working in Azure and those that are working to move up into Azure. So we have a couple of resources out here. So the Azure Cloud Shell docs are available here. Danny Martins, he's one of the PMs on the Cloud Shell team. And so Danny and I chat all the time about Azure Cloud Shell, and his team is very committed to working with the community. We had a community call a couple weeks ago, and that's going to be on a regular basis, very much like the Joey does with the PowerShell team, of just keeping that interaction and that feedback going with the team. I have a GitHub repository that's available for you to get all of the code that I have. I also have all of the videos that I did along with a talk track that are available on YouTube. They're going to be getting updated in the next week. So those are going to give you an opportunity to really run through a lot of the code that I have available. Unfortunately, because of some technical difficulties on my own, we didn't get through all of the cool different things that I wanted to show you. But what I hope I did was open the door for you to kind of take a look at what's available inside there and get you starting to think about what are the different ways that you could use this within your organization. Easiest way to get a hold of me is at Michael Bender on Twitter. So feel free to DM me. My DMs are open. If you have a question, happy to get that feedback from you about whether it's operation stuff, whether it's Cloud Shell, PowerShell, any of that sort of thing. Our team blog is at itopstalk.com. I do a lot of PowerShell blogging, PowerShell basics, things like that, related to Azure and also not Azure. So I just want to thank you. Thank you for dealing with some of my technical difficulties today. Please remember to submit your session feedback. It's super important for me that if there's things that you would have liked to have seen that I didn't get to, or just getting that feedback from you is really important for us as presenters. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your summit.